Welcome to the Social World podcast. I'm Dave Niven, and it's always a pleasure to have you here. Now, this week I'm making it more of a bit of a magazine. I'd like to play you an interview that I did with the BBC concerning recruitment and retention of social workers and the whole landscape of social work profession. And, questions were asked about why people go into social work when there's such enormous stress and strain on it, why people are not going into children's services, and why there's so many agency staff around. So that's a whole discussion we have, and we'll put that in at the beginning. And then I'm going to let you hear an interview I did with Deona Hooper from South Carolina, who has just produced an excellent app, which details will be on the site, for social work in America. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about whether it would be a good thing here. Deona runs the Social Work Helper, which is a magazine, online magazine, that now is establishing itself as a very solid and worthwhile review of social work practice and resources. So let's hear Deona. But first of all, I'd like to go to the BBC.
David Niven chairs two children's safeguarding boards. David, morning.
Morning, Emma.
Why is there such a problem recruiting social workers to work for local authorities?
Well, mainly it's a case of a job that has to be done. It's one of the most vital jobs, in any local authority can actually provide. And so, if the spend has to be made, the spend has to be made. There's a difficulty right across the country. I think some people at one point were saying not too long ago that about 1 in 5 children's social work posts were vacant. And obviously, because the pressure is on local authorities to protect the children in their area, they have to recruit wherever they possibly can. And I mean, obviously, agencies are there. They are more expensive, yeah. But it's one of these ones that's the caught between the rock and a hard place, because if they didn't fill them, the caseloads of the existing permanent social workers would be so overloaded that, mistakes are on the horizon. And, of course, we all know what happens in a child's life if they aren't protected properly.
Why would a qualified children's social worker choose to work for an agency rather than in a permanent position?
Well, I think the interesting thing sometimes is, there's a whole variety of reasons. In some cases it's money, because they might get more money on the short term, if they actually do that, because it's perhaps seemingly more attractive to do so. Flexibility in terms of the hours that they work, or in terms of the length of contract that they take, because for all sorts of personal reasons. Sometimes the place they work in is to do with lifestyle. I know, for example, in places like, Cornwall or wherever, people don't just choose to go there. They choose to go there because of lifestyle reasons as much as anything, until they tend to stay longer.
What about continuity, though, for the actual, the cases, the children and families that they're working with? Does continuity get affected if you're only using agency staff? Yes.
And that's definitely a point against the permanent use of agency staff, or the continuing use of agency staff. One of the main precepts of social work, of good social work, is actually forming a long-term relationship with child, family, whatever. And obviously, if you're just coming in and out, agency staff can't fulfill that. I'm not saying the agency staff are any worse social workers. They're usually just as good, but quite correctly what you said there, the relationship tends to be affected, and therefore, the continuity, the working with a child, the gaining the trust, the whole idea of actually being a trusted friend as well as a professional within that child's life does get sort of watered down a bit.
Is there you mentioned about a national issue with recruiting social workers to work with children. How significant is the publicity that happens when a high-profile case comes up? Does that put people off of choosing social work as a career?
I think it can't help but do that. That's what we've found when we're talking around the country to people. Obviously, if you see constant headlines that sort of challenge social work practice or challenge what happened or the old story, I think we've talked before about this, the kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing, when making major decisions about a child's life. Obviously, people shy away from pressure sometimes about and thinking, well, I don't want to put myself into that. I'd rather do some other discipline within social work that's much more fulfilling and less fraught, if you like. On the other hand, it's a hugely valuable profession and a hugely valuable task that social workers perform. And so if the caseloads were smaller, in other words, if the whole the profession was actually fully staffed, as it were, and ways are being tackled at the moment to deal with this, I've got to say, and the local authorities in our area here in the southwest are as much in the forefront of trying to tackle this as anybody else, then ultimately, you're going to have a much more efficient and practical workforce.
In the meantime, though, is council overspend in this area inevitable, do you think?
Well, I think so. The cuts at the moment, let's not get too political, but everybody knows what we're talking about. The austerity measures that are being forced on local authorities and public services at the moment are digging deep into the credibility of local authorities and their ability to actually fulfill their task. The cuts in public services, somebody's got to make a decision what goes. Is it going to be children's services? Is it going to be the elderly? Is it going to be mental health? Is it going to be something? Something's got to go because the government demand that cuts are made, and local authorities haven't got total control over the budgets. And at the end of the day, it's the people in these communities, the vulnerable people in these communities that are suffering. And for some unknown reason to me, or just some absolutely kind of political kind of ridiculous reason, I think, people are suffering. And I think effectively at the end of the day, it's the wrong decisions that are being made to cut things to public services. And there's plenty of other things in the government locker that I think we could do without, instead of actually cutting services to the vulnerable.
David Niven for Prime Minister, maybe. What do you think? Let's get you in there, David. Thank you very much for your time. David Niven there, former chair of the British Association of Social Workers. He also produces the Social World podcast.
Well, I am joined now by Deona Hooper, who is in Carolina in the United States, and she is the founder, the developer, and the editor-in-chief of the Social Work Helper. Now, Deona's a social worker. She's got a master's in social work, and she concentrated on management and community practice, and has looked at the non-profit side of things, and has been kind of engaging in all sorts of different developments, left, right, and centre ever since. And we'll make sure that you can understand how to look up the Social Work Helper, how to get in touch with Deona if you want to, and look at all the different things that she's been doing in the past. But firstly, I'm going to ask her all about a new innovation that she's just put onto the market. So welcome, Deona.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, Social Work Helper, you've just developed an app for social work. And, could you just tell us a little bit about it, the background, why it is, and where you're hoping it's going?
Absolutely. Well, actually, when you look it up in the iTunes or the Android market, it actually shows up as a news app. Because Social Work Helper technically is a news website with a social work focus. So the goal of the app is to make Social Work Helper more mobile. There's a huge mobile market, which my analytics and most data and research will show you that people tend to get more information from their mobile phones than from their desktop. So part of the expansion was to capitalize on more people who are mobile, who access information that way, to engage those people more so, and to expand the market of people that I have access to.
Okay.
So that was the goal of the mobile app.
What would people find on it? I know it's in development still, but I mean, ultimately, what are you looking for people to find on it?
It's very much still in development. Of course, you're going to find the articles that we create on Social Work Helper within the app. But also one of the things that I'm expanding with the app is, looking at different ways that people consume information. Some people prefer videos versus editorial content. We're going to soon be offering podcasts from different social work perspectives, even some from social justice perspectives, so that people will be able to consume information that way. But the most important feature that it has, which is very US centric, and I hope that we can develop more apps, well, that I can develop more apps in the future. Part of it is about scale and resources, but this app was pretty much US focused with this particular service. So basically, there's a find service function in the app where people, no matter what resource, whether you're looking for domestic violence resources, whether you're looking for a food bank, low cost prescriptions, I put in a lot of online databases so people could have access to them quicker and find local resources in their area faster.
So it's a
And
very modern resource bank, really.
well, that was the idea. I know when I was working in CPS and Child Protective Services here in the U.S., um, I didn't have, we often either had an intern or I had to look up all the resources myself for all of my clients. We didn't have like an online directory. We had Google. Google was our online directory. So whenever I needed to connect clients with services quicker, Google was the only thing that I had. So hopefully this app will take some of those vetting out for social workers, and the resources, the primary online directory for that particular service, they'll be able to find it quicker. And so I categorize them by, you know, the needs that I ran into the most. I mean, it's not all inclusive, but I'm hoping that it will reach, solve an issue for a lot of people.
Okay, yeah. I mean, is this primarily it is for professional people involved in the care system wherever, and whether it's social work or associated kind of disciplines, is that right?
Yes, and I'm hoping that not only helping professionals will take advantage of this app, but I'm hoping that individuals who are looking for resources or helping a loved one or a caregiver who has to access resources all the time, that they will be able to find this app useful as well.
Now that's interesting because I mean that's obviously one angle I was going to ask about your thinking on. I mean, over here, for example, there's a few people, dip their toes into the water at the moment to do with kind of some kind of digital service for our world. But for example, there's one I can think of called Momo, MOMO, which is Mind of My Own, which is an app that's been developed for care leavers.
Oh.
Telling them all about benefits, housing, where to do this, how to help on job interview. The whole range that a young person who's leaving care might want to have at their fingertips. And so I suppose I was wondering about if you're developing it for service users, for those that actually use social work services as well.
Yes, initially I wanted it to just be for helping professionals, and so I had added in a social networking component
Mm-hmm.
so that social workers could also interact and find each other quickly, for support. But
Mm.
then, when I started looking at who was downloading this app and the feedback that I was getting, as far as responses and email, what I found also that a lot of individual people were attracted to this app as well for those reasons, for caregiving. And I have a lot of readers that follow social work helper that are not um, service providers.
Mm-hmm.
So I removed the social networking component so it wouldn't be any security or security concerns for people interacting. I didn't feel comfortable with individuals and service providers being on a type of social network together, so I removed those components, and so now it's just a flow of information out and there's no interaction.
Okay, so we can begin to see that you're hinting at kind of future developments and areas that you want to strengthen. So generally speaking, I mean, somebody listening to this in the UK, and remember that this podcast goes into 99 countries now, so there will be kind of a variety of listeners in different situations, but the majority are in the UK. And what would you say that would be useful to them at the moment about social work helper, about the app? Because I mean, my guess would be that there are transferable knowledge, and there's different things. I mean, there'll be different legal matters and all sorts of things, but there's a lot of the work in social work is transferable, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And one of the things with social work helper that I really try to focus on when we're creating content and putting information out there, I try to keep in mind that there are people from different countries reading and consuming that information. So even though I would love to improve and boost more local content driven about the UK, I do try to focus on topics that are very universal and widely consumed by anyone. So, like if you just want to know more information about sex abuse prevention or looking at different models that may be working for different sectors, those are the kinds of things that we try to highlight so that people can take that information and see how they can apply it in their own sector or in their own local community. So I try to present information at a very macro level so people can drill it down to the micro and see how they can help it apply to them and where they're at.
So good. So the on the app on where we access our currently social work helper. I mean, is there a facility for exchanging information for kind of like a kind of like not a notice board, but you know what I mean, like a place that you can go to actually ask questions and interact with other readers?
Actually, right now, the only thing that I use for that is Facebook, the Facebook community.
Ah,
I was going, and I did in the earlier version of the mobile app that did exist,
hmm.
but I did become concerned about there are strong, there's still strong feelings persist from individuals about social workers and their role and their interaction. So I did want to limit that because there's still some concerns of that that mixing of, even though they're all social work helper readers, I had to be mindful of how um, that interaction could affect one another.
Well, maybe
So
as you develop,
now I use the Facebook page
yeah.
so that people can interact, and sometimes it's sometimes it's a difficult conversation for social workers to hear how individuals feel about their experience with social workers.
Well, we all know that there are always going to be people that have a fantastic experience. There's other people who see the disappointment translated into what they consider a very negative experience. And so, it's always going to be that way because you're dealing with the depths of human emotion and everything and the whole landscape of life itself, aren't you, in social work?
Exactly.
Anyway,
Um,
well, look, can I just ask you something?
sure.
Maybe slightly developing this a bit more, because when I publish this podcast, obviously within the text side of it as well, on the website and so on, there'll be plenty of opportunities now, links in to what you're doing and social work helper, the app, everything. So, can I just broaden it a little bit and say, well, here's you tapping into, if you like, the digital future, and here's you beginning to think about social work in the digital future. What's your experience to date about the social work scene in the bits of America that you're familiar with, at least, and how they are embracing or not embracing and the inevitable kind of technological changes that are coming?
Well, I think I think it's a conversation that many of us in the practice are being forced to have. because technology is constantly moving and evolving, and it's part of the digital world. This is part of how the world consumes information now. So social work is being left behind, or it has to evolve along with it, to be competitive in the marketplace, to be competitive for um, people who are, a generation of people who are very technologically advanced, and then having to go into a profession where you still have to write your notes and then go type them into a system that's very technologically, very, very slow to embrace technology. And so these conversations are being forced to begin. And so, what I find with social work helper, it was that void in that space allowed social work helper to grow very quickly, in comparison to some other media platforms, because I did embrace social media. I did embrace technology, and I also embraced social justice, which is the issue of many, um, in my age group and younger, and then having the combination of all these things, in this macro bubble, um, it spoke to a lot of people, and people migrated to it. And social media, was one of those things where people of my age group and younger are having the discussions of our day about how we feel about society, how we feel about life in general. And so, social work helper was able to fill that void in that social work space.
How do
And
you? Yeah, sorry. Can I
oh,
just ask a couple of things? Just because I
sure.
mean, for me, the debate is still really to be had. It's only in its infancy, and maybe
Exactly.
we're a bit late, but never mind. Both sides of the water here. But things like the apps, and also things like the different sort of social media platforms. Now, there's been a debate going on here for a while about whether or not it's considered unethical, if you like, from a social work perspective, to what some people would call spy on people's social media if you considered that somebody in that household was at risk, to gain information about changes, composition, or gather evidence or whatever about that household. Now, we all know that the police do this in
Yeah.
some forms or another, but should social work question? That's a debate that sort of is again, as I said, in its infancy, but it's certainly very relevant to one or two child deaths that we've come across in this country, saying, for example, well, if we'd only looked at the household social media, that might just have been preventable.
I just posted about, an article on on the social work helper Facebook, in reference to our online self and our reality self. And research and studies show that those two are oftentimes dramatically different. As a CPS investigator, child welfare investigator, I use social media as a tool to locate people, to get a sense of, that person's daily life. But I
Mm,
also had to understand and realize that an online presentation is really oftentimes not a true manifestation of that person. It's a presentation, or
surely
what
not,
that
Deona.
person
Surely people don't
overpresents.
put photographs of themselves looking younger and things like that. I can't believe
Exactly.
it.
So you have to, I think it's imperative that as a profession, we need to do a better job of educating and training our social work students and professionals in our core education, about how to use social media, understanding not just the aspects of the technology, but also the research behind, social media. I mean, there's a lot of psychology that goes into social media, understanding it.
Mhm.
And
And
if
yeah.
we are not imparting that knowledge, on it's like we're giving people in our profession a car and say, here, go drive it. And we expect you to use it responsibly and don't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And we need to do a better job.
Now, there's other aspects, though, that do pose some risk, and I think these are going to be some of the challenges. For example, if a child is adopted from a very difficult situation where there was a lot of risk and abuse and so forth, and the birth family are excluded from then on. But when that child gets older and gets to be able to manipulate, social media, the digital world, more are now tracing their birth families that way, unsupervised. And that is proving to be quite a tricky kind of new challenge. Would you recognize that?
This is the challenge that I don't really think is a technology one, but a human one that we need to rectify within our profession. I mean, this case studies show over and over again that when we sever a child from the family, with cause, which is, often the reason why a child has to be adopted, but we do sever that child from their entire family, not just their birth parents, but from their cousins, their grandparents, any extended family, we sever that child. And case study after case study show that this child is going to look and seek out this family. I mean, it almost never fails. So why do we not add in protections for when that happens? Why do we not create laws and safeguards to help this child reconnect with that family if they choose to in the future? Um, I just think that that's something that we should not only consider when we, in paternity rights, we should also look ahead and anticipate that this child is going to want to reconnect, and how can we help facilitate that in a safe manner. That's one of the things I've always thought that we should do better.
No, good point. It really just illustrates again one of numerous challenges that we're going to have to deal with, and that's why, as well, we have to get up to speed with the actual use of the digital world. Let me ask a little bit about the image of social work, because in many respects, to my view, and I think it's the same in America, social workers are, it's 50-50 sometimes about how they're regarded in the community. And, an awful lot of them are not permitted, for example, to talk to the media, or there's not enough information put into the media because people in employers regard things as secret instead of confidential. There's no sense in identifying a child when it's not necessary. That's important. But other times you can talk about good news, you can talk about success. I mean, what's the landscape like, would you say, in America for that?
I mean, I think the same is here. I think it's the same as there. When I first started social work helper, many people told me that what I was doing was unethical because I was not just talking about practice issues like how to, um, you know, how to do a genogram. Oh, it's okay to have that conversation. But when I want to talk about, politics or um, issues involving what we're facing today, but from a social work perspective, or giving a social work um, looking at that issue through a social work lens, I was often told that was unethical. Social workers shouldn't be having those conversations. We shouldn't be engaging in those conversations in public. And so that's one of the things I wanted to set out to change when I created this platform, and to encourage people that you can have conversations. There's nothing confidential about talking about process, about how we protect, to help people better understand the systems that we implement. There's nothing wrong with helping people navigate the worlds that, most of the things that we implement. People have to go through those systems, and they often don't have any guidance or anyone helping them navigate. And I said, who better to do that than us?
No, I
And
agree with you on that part. Just briefly, well, I don't mean to interrupt you, but briefly, just to say, you don't have to wait for a case to arrive to tell people what happens in a case.
exactly, exactly. I think if we had those conversations, social workers wouldn't seem as scary. Also, people would have a better understanding that social workers are in many aspects of life and not just child welfare. Um, we help people in, palliative care. Where I mean, people, you're gonna have, unless you're extremely wealthy, at some point in your life, you're gonna have a social worker involved in your life, whether you're sick or you have a sick family member, or here in the U.S. you have school social workers who, there are social workers everywhere. In
Like mushrooms, they just spring up overnight. Yeah, I know.
Exactly. And imagine if we were out front having those conversations, we would be better able to help people navigate, and they wouldn't see us as the boogeyman.
No, I know, I get it, I get it. But listen, would you agree with this? There's one point before I get to your final question, because we're going to be running out of time. But just in this country, I've been invited to give a guest lecture. I did this some time ago at a postgraduate journalism class, to actually explain a bit to journalists or journalists to be about what social worker is, and therefore inform them a bit before they get out there when they were sent off to do stories about social work, which I thought was quite reasonable. And I'd like to see it the other way around. I'd like to see experienced journalists, coming and giving guest lectures on social work courses, just to explain a little bit about what they would be all looking for, what drives them, and therefore what social workers could expect. I think it's not every journalist is a kind of a slavering anti-social work person. A lot of them are cooperative and interested, provided you give them truth and reasonable kind of data. And
Exactly.
so, at the end of the day, I think we could do far more together. So just comment about that. But then if you'd also like finally just to say a little bit more about Social Work Helper and where you see it going, how people can access it. And we'll revisit it, and I'll promote it through this podcast as well. And you can tell people about the podcast too. So I think it's all a question of cooperation here. So firstly about the journalists, and then finally about the social work helper, if you would.
Yes, I mean, I absolutely agree that if we one of the things about social work education, when we're being educated to become social workers, there's so many opportunities for collaboration and crossover. You have the schools of journalism, everyone is right there. We have opportunities to learn and study from each other, and I think it would be a great opportunity if social workers did do more interdiscipline um, type interaction. So, I also think that a lot of social workers are afraid of the press. There's a mutual fear because social workers have only been presented when a child dies,
Hmm.
and but journalists, that's, I mean, they're news writers, so of course that's what they're gonna cover. Social work, if you want more human interest stories or more community outreach, that is the responsibility of the social worker to present that information and to write editorial articles. That is not the journalist's job to be the PR for social workers. So I think we have to educate on whose responsibility it is to present what information,
Okay.
and not expect the other to be their PR rep, because that's not the journalist's job.
Okay. Finally, then, the future of social work helper.
So the future for social work helper, I really hope to expand it, where I am doing, and offering more content for other countries. I really want social work helper to be a global magazine, and I'm taking steps every day to move it towards that direction. I hope to use the platform to increase people's global awareness. Very much on a macro level, so we can learn from each other and see how things are done in other places, and so we can take that information and see how we can apply it to our own locality. So that's my hope for social work helper.
Okay. Anything final you'd like to say before we sign off?
I would love to. I would love to connect. My phone keeps ringing. I apologize.
Okay.
I would love to connect with a university and see how we could, put together information to help train, social workers in technology and media.
Do you mean
And
at a university in the States or university here, Europe?
I'm open to any school. I'm open to any school. I think with social work, it has to be a school that's open to this idea, and it's not a popular concept yet in our profession. Um, I think there are different pockets in different schools that are starting to see that they there has to be some evolution. So it really would require a type school that says, okay, I see the need and the importance for this. Let's innovate and try something different. And so,
Okay. Well, let's hope that somebody's listening. Deona Hooper, it's been a pleasure talking to you today, and I'm sure we're going to talk to you again in the future. Thank you very much.
thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's it for this time. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Please keep your thoughts and comments coming about future podcasts, what we can do. I'm also looking out for some guest blogs if any of you are interested out there, and if they fit in, I'd be very welcoming of them. As well as that, remember there's SpeakPipe, which is that one-click service right beside the podcast on the website, which you can leave an instant voice message on. And I would be delighted if you did so. So with thanks as always to Alba Digital Media, I'll see you next time. Thank you.